Perhaps the most common question that is posed to museum staff and educators dealing with things like fossils and other artifacts is it real? In itself, it's a perfectly reasonable question, especially when someone has the unexpected privilege to touch and hold a specimen and wants to know if this really is an original of some kind. Often though it can come from incredulity, that something like a tyrannosaur tooth really could exist or be real. In my own case, working with dinosaurs, this is also a quite reasonable question. Their bones can be so outsized, bizarrely proportioned and downright strange that some skepticism that these could possibly be genuine is quite understandable. However, the intonation of the query is often plain that someone quite simply doesn't believe that these things are actually real but in some way a fabrication, and here is where things get tricky, as some specimens and exhibits are rather more real than others. When it comes to fossils, at least, there are three main categories such specimens may fall into. First of all are real specimens. Actual fossils, bones, shells, leaves, tracks, eggs and so on pulled from the ground and are absolutely real. Even these though are in some sense not quite genuine. A fossil bone is very much a real thing, but it's no longer the original bone that was in an ancient animal, but one that has changed in mineral composition over millions of years. It may be perfectly preserved, but it's very much a fossil bone rather than an actual bone. In the case of things like footprints and natural molds from where bones or shells have been lost, there is another degree of separation. Again, they are pulled from the ground, but they are very much a remnant of where a fossil or organism was rather than being an actual part of the creature. So even in the most real of specimens there is a bit of a disconnect between the original that was once alive and the fossil in your hand, though few would argue that these are not real, although they may have undergone a bit of repair and restoration to make them available to display. A Tyrannosaurus Rex at the Field Museum, Chicago, Illinois. The skeleton is an original, but the skull shown here is a cast as it is too heavy to mount without risking damage. The original fossil head sits in a case below. Photograph Alamy. For large things like dinosaur skeletons there are relatively few on display anywhere. For a start, there are only so many good Tyrannosaurus or Stegosaurus skeletons to go around between all the museums that want them, and also it's now considered not such a great idea to drill holes through your priceless bones and then stand them up on display. As a result, many skeletons and other items in exhibitions are cast copies of real bones. These are made in much the same way a dentist does of your teeth, or you may have done at school by making molds of resin or rubber cement and taking a cast from this. Whole skeletons can be produced in this way, but also even the best originals may have pieces missing or too damaged to be shown, and so a cast from another animal or another bone of the same one might be used to fill in a missing arm or a rib. Casts are at one level clearly not real. They are not a real specimen of fossil, but equally they are not fake or fraudulent. They are a replica that reproduces the original as accurately as possible and often down to microscopic detail, believe it or not, such as the fidelity of the molds being used. Sure, a photograph of a Dahlia da Vinci is not a real painting or drawing, but it does not pretend to be, and clearly shows what the original was like. Museums are generally good at flagging what is and is not real, and some even include little keys to show which parts are made up of fossils and which from casts, or even ensure the two are very different colors. Even this beautifully preserved dinosaur has some ribs and toes missing. If mounted for display, these might have to be sculpted to replace the missing parts, but we do understand what they should look like from this and other specimens of close relatives. Photograph John Kanglu, University of Edinburgh. Finally, we have models or sculptures of fossils. You can't always make a cast of something if it is exceptionally fragile, or there may be nothing to make a cast of. The first skeleton of a new species is the only one out there, and so any missing parts can't easily be made up with a cast from another animal. There might be a close relative which likely had the same features and was about the right size, but not necessarily. In this case, something will need to be created to fill in the gaps. It might be a cast that is then modified in order to make it look right, or maybe something made from scratch. Clearly, such creations are much less real than a cast or a genuine fossil, but again they are not exactly a fake either, as they are based on what we know of these species and their anatomy. You don't have to have the arms of a new tyrannosaur preserved to make a good sculpture when all of its close relatives have short arms with 2 fingers, and certain key features of the joints and claws are near universal in carnivorous dinosaurs. Sculpting the arms and adding them to your mount will make the display a much better representation of what the skeleton would have looked like than with leaving them out. We have a good understanding of, and can make solid predictions about, the missing parts, and they are not a figment of imagination but based on real research and understanding of the animal's biology and evolution. Plenty of displays in museums, even of single specimens, may mix fossils, casts and sculptures, and may even have multiple different individuals mixed together to make one skeleton in older ones. To varying degrees they're real, or at least representative of real things, so the simple question of is it real can be a surprisingly hard one to answer in simple terms. Even so, all of these represent what scientists know, or can work out, about the original organisms, and that makes them all quite appropriate for displays.